So, we're going to be talking about Act 5, Scene 3, the extract that Year 11 worked on in the recent mock. It begins Bring Me No More Reports, and we're going to try and structure our discussion around an acronym designed by Mr. Drake himself.
Thank you very much.
Which I'll let him explain to you now.
Okay, so the acronym is qualities. So when we ask you to look at your answer, we'll be asking you to look for the qualities in your answer. So the Q stands for two words: quotes, make sure you use them, and question, keep referring to it. U, understanding. In order to get band 3, level 3, you have to show understanding of the play. Audience, A, make sure you refer to people watching at the time, or a modern audience. Language is L. Try to link as well some of the words together in terms of language techniques. I is insight into context. T is terminology, using the right subject terms for the right techniques. I is interpretation. Try to look for different ways of picking apart a particular quote, one or two interpretations for the same quote. E is your classic effect on the reader by the writer. And S is structure and form.
Thank you, sir. So yeah, a really good acronym to use when you're analysing any particular text, to be honest, because if you tick off every single one of those letters, you know you're going to have done a good job. You're going to have covered all the bases you need to in order to get the things from the mark scheme. So we're going to jump straight in and start discussing this speech for Macbeth. Act 5, so we're right at the end of the play now, and we know that, well, you should know from reading the play, that he's surrounded by the English army, and on his way out now, really, his thanes have abandoned him, and it's looking pretty bleak for Macbeth, and he's quite angry about it, but he's also defiant, and he begins his speech with "Bring me no more reports," which is a command. It shows his kingly nature, but also it's an imperative, which is a good piece of terminology for you. Bring me no reports is ordering people, stop bringing them reports of the soldiers arriving. He knows what's happening.
At this point, I've obviously, as Sir has said, made sure I know whereabouts in the play this is from, what has happened before, and looked at the question as well. Remember, your cue was question. So the key word in this question is hero. So as I'm looking for these language techniques, as I'm looking at the structure, I'm continually asking myself the question, how does this show how far Shakespeare has presented Macbeth as a hero? So the idea of present is what techniques, structural and language, has Shakespeare, the writer, used to show us Macbeth as a hero. Remember, he's crafted Macbeth out of his own words, his own ideas, and it's the reaction that we have to that. So how far do we think he is presented as a hero? So have that question all the way through your answer, have it in your head as you're annotating, and you won't go too far wrong. So the idea of him saying "bring me no more reports," as Sarah said, imperative, is quite demanding. It's quite potentially strong leadership, quite heroic. What are we saying it's suggesting, sir? He wants no more reports.
He knows what's happening now. He's saying there's kind of no point in you telling me anymore. I know that I'm surrounded, and yet it doesn't seem to bother him. Let them fly all. He's saying, I'll bring it on almost.
Yeah, and he's repeated the word fly, repetition of the word fly twice in this text, indicating a sense of freedom. Maybe he's given up now. He's released from maybe the chains of maybe he knows he's going to die. Maybe there's a part of him that realises he's going to die. He's going to be free as a result of that. He's used the word fly, which contrasts to something earlier on in the play So we were talking about imagery to do with him being...
Yeah, cabin, cribbed, confined, and also he uses an image of him being pinned down like a bear. That word fly seems to suggest maybe he's got kind of nothing to lose now. But going back on from Sir's acronym, you've got I for interpretations. You could argue actually he's saying his let them fly all, that word them. Maybe he's talking about his thanes, which he goes on to talk about in a few more lines.
So we're linking here, we're linking language together. So we're talking about them and then the false thanes. So we're linking the language together.
And the impression then it would be that his thanes are free and Macbeth is not. He's kind of locked down in his castle. So two different interpretations of that particular bit.
We then move on to him referencing the witch's prophecies. He uses a interesting phrase when he talks about "I cannot taint with fear." He repeats fear 3 times throughout the soliloquy, up to the point the servant enters. It's not actually a soliloquy, is it, sir? Because he's talking
more
to...
More monologue, I would say.
More a monologue, yeah. So that's a structural phrase you could get in. So he uses fear 3 times, which might indicate, because he's mentioning the word, that he's actually a little bit more worried than he's making out.
Yeah.
Or another interpretation that he's saying the word because he's not bothered at all.
Yeah.
So multiple interpretation there. The word taint is an interesting one, sir.
Yeah. Well, it implies to me when I hear that word taint, kind of means like cursed by or spoiled by, and I think that kind of shows how Macbeth feels about fear. He sneers at anyone who's afraid, and he sees it as a challenge. Certainly earlier in the play, Lady Macbeth challenges him, saying, are you too afraid to do this? And that seems to be what spurs him on.
So you're mentioning there, sir, something about the play as a whole. So you're linking ideas from the text, thinking about other things where maybe he's not presented quite so heroically.
Yeah.
Some moments in the rest of the play where he is tainted with fear might be a good thing to talk about at that point with reference to heroic qualities.
And certainly at this moment he's presented, I would say, as someone who seems courageous. He's saying, cannot taint with fear, I'm not afraid, I will fight anyone who's prepared to take me on.
He then asks a couple of rhetorical questions, again a language technique, so the effect of those may be suggesting he's not quite so confident in himself, that he's having to ask himself questions, or maybe it shows the opposite, that actually he's been quite demeaning here and saying, what's the boy, Malcolm, and then later on he calls the servant a cream-faced loon. So it's shown a leader or a hero potentially that's not really treating those people around him with very much respect.
Yeah, agreed. That word boy, you'd focus in on, wouldn't you, as a kind of insult to Malcolm. From the audience's perspective, again, part of Sir's acronym, they would be traditional audience. They'd be rooting for Malcolm now. He's the rightful king. So to hear him insulted by Macbeth, who's done terrible, terrible things, I think he'd be losing the support of the audience at this point.
So how's the audience feeling? Well, they're not on Macbeth's side at the moment. Right. He's certainly the anti-hero.
Can I also say as well that was he not of woman, not born of woman, creates a kind of comparison between himself and other lesser humans, almost suggesting that he is godlike. I'd argue, was he not born of woman? Almost like he's saying, not like me, I'm above other humans. But, we know at this point, really, we've kind of sussed out that the witches are tricking him.
Yeah. He then goes on to refer to the words of the apparitions. Mm-hmm. Is that right, sir? When he says, "Fear not, Macbeth, no man that's born of woman shall have power upon thee." So by using that, does that suggest a heroic quality that is this his last insurance policy now? Does he really believe in that? He's using the phrase mortal consequences. Is he aware of his own mortality at this stage? Does he believe that he is the hero, he is going to survive, he is going to win? Or does the word mortal maybe suggest that he fears that he is going to die? However, he's still got that insurance policy.
Yeah. And you could argue, couldn't you, that he is just trying to convince himself here.
Yeah.
The rhetorical questions, as you've already mentioned, quoting the witches. He's just he's looking around and thinking, this doesn't look very good. So, and his head is telling him.
There's lots of spin going on here, isn't there? He's been his own spin doctor here. He then talks about flying again. We've talked about that. The false thanes, we've already said that might link to the them from earlier on.
And notice as well, sir, the fly false thanes. You've got that alliteration, but also the comma after fly makes it a bit uncomfortable to say, doesn't it? The fly false thanes.
Yeah.
He's kind of almost tumbling over those words there, showing how upset he is really that he's been abandoned by his men. Absolutely.
If you think about the effect as well, which we always have to do, of language, alliteration is quite difficult to explain sometimes. The effect of it's kind of panicky sound, isn't it?
Yeah.
There's a fear, a stammer potentially in his tone. We then move on to the next part. Bear in mind, you will have 45 minutes in this exam, so you cannot, unlike what we're trying to do here, pick at everything. Treat it like a linguistic buffet where you take the stuff out that you know how to deal with and talk about the effect. Otherwise, you are not going to have time to talk about the whole text, the play as a whole. Yeah. So please be aware of that. We've tried to talk about other bits as well to bring those bits in. The bit at the end, though, I think is really just before the end, where he talks about using the mind I swayed by, the heart I bear, sagging, shaking. So terminology, we're talking about verbs there, swaying, sagging, shaking, indicates some kind of movement here. He's maybe feeling a little bit doubtful, although he's saying he's not sagging or not shaking. Is there the use of movement in those words, verbs, is interesting.
Yeah, and I mean, if you apply those to maybe like a ship, sinking ship, swaying, sagging, his sails are sagging, he's shaking, you get the idea he's kind of about to disappear into the ocean maybe.
Yeah, and it links as well, earlier part in the play when just before he was about to kill Duncan, he used the phrase bend up each corporal agent. So that bending up, putting stuff together, goes against the idea of sagging, doesn't it? That there he was talking about strengthening himself, now it's words like sag, although he's saying he's not going to sag.
A great point as well, and just reminded me as well that he talks about before I was concrete, doesn't he? Before he says cabin, crib, confined, before he finds out that Fleance has escaped, he just says I would have been concrete, something solid. And now Sir's already pointed out that these verbs are very kind of shaky, should really create a comparison of how he wants to be and how he is in reality.
And then the important word in the next line, devil, the references to the devil throughout this play, the idea that he's almost set himself up, less of a hero, more of a devil in our opinion.
And the devil damn thee, it's him that's damning him, isn't it?
Yeah.
The irony is actually he's kind of like the devil. Yeah.
You got colour references, black, cream, goose look, obviously white, in implying purity or evil. And we also thought about the idea of the structure maybe of the whole scene, as part of the scene, the use of iambic pentameter at the start, quite secure. Bring me no more reports, let them fly all, that stress on stress syllable pattern. And at points he moves himself away from that. The way it's separated on line 7 into 8, them fly false thanes, is a real indication of his mind wandering a little bit. And then you look for rhyme as well, which is another aspect of the form. Bear and fear are not quite perfect rhymes. Loon and look, not quite perfect rhymes. In fact, you could say loon and look are examples of assonance. So what would you say the reason for Shakespeare using those would be, sir?
He's breaking up, isn't he? And you can tell as well by the punctuation added to that. He's not completing his rhymes, which a complete rhyme kind of gives a sense of security or confidence. The bear and fear doesn't quite work. Loon and look doesn't quite work. Again, even ending in a question mark, add to the punctuation, all of it creates an impression that he is kind of collapsing.
So once you have looked at that in detail, picking out your parts that you feel that you can comment on, obviously the second part of the question is reference to the play as a whole. Now, you can either start with the extract and work yourself out from there, or before you start looking at the extract, you can think, well, where does this scene fit into the bigger picture, the bigger structure of this play? And we know it happens near the end. How does he start the play? Well, reference to him being brave at the start. Is this sign of him returning to that bravery now? Is there indication that he is brave at this point? What happens in the middle of the play? Is there an idea that his wife and the witches, their manipulation of him, reduces his heroic qualities in the eyes of the audience?
Yeah, and I think, I mean, I tend to look at it as it's 5 acts. We're in Act 5. He's been disintegrating over the course of the play, really, starting at the top as this heroic creature everybody kind of raves about. By the end, he's at the bottom, and he's really turned into a villain, turned into the anti-hero.
So would you advise to maybe pick out a moment from each of the other acts and look at the structural decline or otherwise?
And see where it takes you as well, like we've been doing, as you pointed things out, so it reminds me of things from earlier in the play. And I think there's nothing wrong with doing that in your essay sometimes. You think, that word reminds me of earlier on.
Almost going off on a tangent.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's what the L was, language links, ideas between words that link in.
And I think there's lots of differences between Macbeth. Macbeth compared as a hero at the start of the play, now I would argue is a villain. He's still courageous, I think there's no doubt about that, but I wouldn't describe him as a hero. However, there are still things that he's doing. For example, Sir said, "The mind I sway by, the heart I bear." That is something he's been doing right from the start. He's been led by his heart, by his ambition, and yet his head has been holding him back. His own thoughts and his own doubts are the things that hold him back. So he's been doing that from the very beginning. That's definitely, that shows my knowledge of the play. Those kind of links are the things that you need to be doing in order to get top marks. And also another point, sir, you said about yet another interruption, which is a common repeated idea by Shakespeare.
In terms of structure, the fact that he's interrupted in this monologue needs to be referred to. What does that tell us about his heroic status? Why has Shakespeare had him interrupted here? There must be a reason. What is the reason? How does that make us feel about Macbeth? And how does he then react to that interruption? Maybe it is suggesting that he's not as strong.
Strong-minded as he would like to believe. Because he's so indecisive. It's only because of Lady Macbeth he finally decides to kill Duncan. It's only because he sees the dagger, really, that drives him towards the bedchamber. The only decision he really makes is when he decides to kill Macduff's family, and even then he says, "This I'll do before my purpose call." So he shows them, he even recognises himself that he's indecisive. So although I would argue he has changed throughout the play, there are elements that appear right at the very beginning and are still present here in Act 5.
Okay. I think that probably would give you more than enough for a 45-minute answer. Remember, you need to plan. Remember your qualities, tick them off, and you should do a very, very good job.